Urgent, a bloody explosion inside Russia. The collapse of the empire has begun right now. Solovyov is inciting a hunt for Armenians and Azerbaijanis. The massacre involving migrants has already started. The streets are on the verge of exploding. Civil war is already at the doorstep. The USA is in flames. The revolt against Trump has turned into chaos. Assault on the government quarter. Gunfire and blood. The country is on the edge. They're firing on civilians. A global-scale scandal. Trump is cornered. Power is slipping away. Shock. The Ukrainian deadly Peregrine Falcon is in play. A nightmare. Putin's nightmare has become reality. Our missile struck the heart of Russia. The ballistic execution of Putin's rear has begun. The thunder of a Ukrainian missile has roused an entire region of Russia. Transnistria has ignited. Ukraine and Moldova have stormed in. The secret plan is underway. Moscow was struck from behind. The Russians have found themselves in a terrible blockade. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot? Slaughter inside Russia. The Kremlin is pitting nations against each other. Solovyov has declared a hunt for Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Civil war is on the doorstep. Tensions inside Russia have reached a boiling point. The level of fierce hatred between Russians and migrants is off the charts. The collapse of the empire is beginning. Shocking details. Look.
Russia is facing another series of scandals involving so-called representatives of a non-titular nation. Kadyrov's commander Alaudinov explains why Russians cannot marry Chechen women.
500,000 people ask this question every day. The same question. Why can't a Chechen woman marry a Russian? Wait. First of all, who knows that you are Russian or who you are? Is this instead of constantly shouting about how bad Chechens are to the Russians, we need to give them advice so that they return to their traditions?
And here's the news. It turns out that it is the Russians who are to blame for not respecting the Chechens. And for example, Alaudinov himself once wanted to marry a Russian woman, but he wasn't allowed to.
I had a girlfriend with whom I had such a relationship that we decided to get married. Her name was Ira. She might even see this. When she came home and told her mother that she wanted to marry a Chechen, she was forbidden to marry me. Her sister, her mother, they gave her an ultimatum. If you marry a Chechen, we will completely disown you. I can pretty much assure you that today I could name thousands of people who would never in their lives let their daughter marry a Muslim, a Chechen. This is a reality.
But it's not only the peoples within Russia who suffer from pervasive racism. For example, propagandist Solovyov stated that the ungrateful Armenians should be punished and that a so-called special military operation should be launched in Armenia.
The loss of Armenia. Now that's a huge problem. The ongoing problems in our region of Asia, specifically in Central Asia, as it is commonly called, now that could potentially become a very huge and significant problem for us. We need to very clearly define our goals and objectives. We need to make it clear. The games are over. To hell with international law, with the international order. If, for our national security, it was necessary to launch the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, then why, based on the same reasoning, can't we start such operations in other areas within our sphere of influence?
Before this, the unhinged Solovyov had already suggested invading Azerbaijan. In his twisted mind, you're either Russian or you're second class, someone who has no right to speak. And
I want to remind you of the amount of money that is transferred from Russia to Azerbaijan and not from Azerbaijan to Russia. And then apparently the situation could change dramatically. Is that exactly what they're counting on? Or considering the 300 kilometers of border and reading about what they're allowing themselves and watching how on central television everyone is allowed to say, "Do you want to go to war?"
at the same time, in Russia, the so-called Russian community is growing, apparently a public organization with total hatred towards migrants. Supposedly under the guise of protecting Russians, they freely attack migrants and bear no responsibility for beatings and abuse.
Those guys who live next door to him and cook pilaf, they're cooking today. But tomorrow they might cut my head off. They're already brazenly, openly saying, not just to us, but to these women, yours are over there and we're here. They'll be lying over there, and we'll be having our way with you here, as they say. In terms of percentages, we're still losing to the migrants. So, for example, if tomorrow a war breaks out, migrants against Russians will lose it.
Rumor has it that the Russian community is under the protection of the main enemy of migrants, the head of the investigative committee, Bastrykin, whose main goal is to send as many newcomers to the front as possible.
This is our trend too. We started it. We catch them during raids, register them, and send them there. Some go, as I already said, about 10,000 have gone, but many slip away.
Meanwhile, news about the recruitment of citizens from so-called friendly countries into the Russian army is appearing more and more actively online. The new trend is Indians who are lured to Russia supposedly to work in the service sector and then, in a surprising turn, end up in meat grinder assaults.
We informed our command that the Prime Minister of India is negotiating with the President of Russia for our release, but they don't want to listen to us. They're sending us to the front lines as many here have already died.
The agent also told me that I would be doing loading and unloading work. But when I arrived at the address, I saw military personnel there.
I told them that I didn't want to serve in the army. They threatened me, saying that if I didn't sign the contract, they would kill me. After that, they gave us a training that lasted only a few days and then sent us to the front lines.
One thing is absolutely clear. No matter how much the Russian authorities go on about a multinational country, everyone except themselves is just a resource, which they conveniently and ruthlessly use for their own criminal purposes.
America is in flames. An uprising against Trump, government districts being stormed, and blood on the streets. The situation has spiraled out of control. Fire has been opened on civilians, Trump is cornered, and the Democrats are seizing power. They've pushed for Cyprus's impeachment. See the details? Protests against Trump in the US are gaining new momentum. More and more people are taking to the streets. Hundreds of new protest actions are taking place across the country after a 37-year-old woman was killed by an immigration and customs enforcement agent in Minneapolis on January 7th. By January 9th, a video recorded on the mobile phone of the immigration officer who shot the activist had already been published. The footage shows Renee Good, a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident and mother of 3, calmly telling the agent that she is not angry with him, after which he opens fire.
The new footage contradicts the version of the incident given by U.S. federal authorities, including statements made by President Donald Trump, that the woman violently, intentionally, and maliciously drove her car into an ICE officer.
The Trump administration stated that the agent who opened fire acted in self-defense. Local authorities, in turn, continued to insist that the woman did not pose any immediate threat.
This is not the beginning of the protests. They have happened before, because in general, over the past few months in the United States, this has become very popular. This is the end of 2021. The powerful and provocative slogan, "No Kings," which serves as a profound reflection of the deep-seated internal unrest and social turbulence currently present within American society, regarding the fact that Donald Trump is increasingly building an autocratic model of governance, in other words, dismantling the democratic institutions that exist to maintain balance in the country, and concentrating more and more power so that the president essentially becomes the central figure of the nation.
At the same time, the mayor of Minneapolis and the head of the city police department made it clear that while they share the outrage of the protesters, they will not tolerate violence in the streets. They justified this by saying that the protests had turned into riots and property had been damaged. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension also stated that the FBI initially promised a joint investigation but then withdrew from it. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that this investigation falls exclusively under federal jurisdiction. Moreover, the city's mayor, Jacob Frey, had previously called on the Immigration Service to leave the city, and he criticized the decision of the U.S. presidential administration to deny Minneapolis investigators participation in the BCA investigation. He accused the White House of being too quick to choose a version of events rather than the truth. In other words, the official authorities led by Donald Trump not only refused to acknowledge the murder, but also obstruct the investigation.
When a politician comes to power on a wave of promises, that is a classic example of populism, then after a certain period of time when it becomes obvious that these promises will not be fulfilled in real life, the people who voted for him become his fiercest opponents because they all feel that they have been deceived, that they all voted because they were shown a beautiful picture, but real life is different. In other words, gas prices aren't going down, they're going up. Food prices aren't going down, they're going up. The bill for your daily trip to the store keeps getting bigger even though you're not buying anything extra. And all of this creates that very negativity in society.
Against this backdrop, Americans' outrage toward Trump is even greater. If earlier protests against migration policy happened in response to new laws, now the situation has escalated many times over. After all, we're talking about a death at the hands of a representative of the Immigration Service.
At this stage, this is yet another issue facing the authorities. Or rather, for the authorities of the United States of America, this is the policy toward migrants. Trump, in many ways, built his policy as a response to the large wave of migration to the US. But here, it's important to understand the history of the United States of America. This is a country of migrants. This is a country created by migrants. The United States of America did not exist, not in the 12th century, nor the 13th, 14th, or 15th. The USA essentially was formed at the end of the 18th century. Why? Because migrants from Europe and later from other continents came to the USA. For a new life, it was called the New World back then. That's why this rejection of policy, especially anti-migrant policy, created a foundation. And here everyone is always waiting for a spark. In this case, that spark was the events in Minnesota.
Already in the fall of 2026, elections to the House of Representatives will be held in America. And subsequently, this could lead to a third impeachment of Trump.
While these widespread protests, yes, they may not lead to any immediate or tangible political outcomes, they serve as a powerful manifestation of the broader public's collective sentiment toward Donald Trump. And that specific attitude is decidedly and overwhelmingly unfavorable. And this negative attitude, on November 2nd, 2026, will lead to an anti-Trump majority gathering in the House of Representatives. Moreover, there will also be elections for a third of the Senate, and something tells me that the Democrats will have a majority in the Senate as well. The people who are now holding up signs will have ballots in their hands, and essentially, this will lead to an anti-Trump majority. And where there is an opposition majority, there will be a third impeachment for Trump. Trump is already speaking about this openly. He is asking people not to vote for the Democrats so that he doesn't face a third impeachment. But again, his actions are quite clearly pushing the American public toward giving him an opposition Congress, both chambers, and accordingly, a third impeachment.
Such protests may not change the situation immediately, but in the long run, this could mean serious problems for Donald Trump's political career. Shock! Ukraine's Sapsan ballistic missile is in use. The new system struck Russian defenses, putting the region on edge with Ukrainian ballistic power. The turning point of the war has arrived. Now the Ukrainian armed forces are setting the rules. Watch for all the details.
Information has appeared online that the day before the Ukrainian armed forces struck the chemical plant in Rostov with a Sapsan ballistic missile. This is not the first time information about the use of Sapsans has surfaced.
At the moment it is known, but according to reports from the Russian side as well, there have been at least 10 instances of this ballistic missile being used on the territory of the Russian Federation.
A year ago, President Zelensky announced that Ukraine had developed its own ballistic missile.
There was a successful test of the first Ukrainian ballistic missile, and I congratulate you on that. Our defense industrial complex. I can't share any more details about this missile. And
already this year, the Sapsans will go into mass production.
According to information from open sources, it is reported that the production of these strike systems will be about 20 to 30 missiles per month, starting as early as 2026.
According to the stated specifications, the Sapsan missile is better than almost all known foreign counterparts.
The tactical and technical characteristics of the Sapsan include a target engagement range of up to 500 kilometers. For comparison, the American Attack-MS has a range of 300 kilometers, and accordingly the Storm Shadow Scalp also has a range of up to 300 kilometers. But unlike the American Attack-MS, which has a warhead of 260 kilograms, the Ukrainian Sapsan has a range of 500 kilometers.
In addition, the tactical and technical characteristics of ballistic missiles are planned to be improved.
I believe that the absolute minimum is 500 kilometers, and then ideally up to 1,000, 1,500. Let's put it this way. At a minimum, we should be able to cover the European part of Russia with our ballistic missiles. And this missile has already come a long way, and it's almost been brought to its logical conclusion. Right now, it's undergoing testing, and we're waiting for the moment when we can start mass production.
The development of the missiles began even before Russia's full-scale invasion, but according to experts, the work was deliberately sabotaged.
It has better characteristics than the Iskander and is superior to the comparable Chinese system. Even back then, let's say 15 years ago, people were working on this, and not without reason. The Saudis bought this system and financed the project for some time, but there was a lot of resistance from the Russians and their agents here because they all understood what was at stake. At that time, we weren't allowed to develop a range greater than 200 kilometers.
Analysts predict that thanks to the new missiles, the enemy's army will face major problems and new losses.
These are field depots for cluster munitions and points of permanent or temporary deployment for personnel. With the right intelligence, we can directly strike the launchers themselves. The Iskanders on the territory of the Russian Federation. This is the main advantage of these strike systems.
But of course, the most important advantage of the Sapsan missile is that it is entirely Ukrainian, so it does not require permission from Western partners to strike any targets on enemy territory.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. It has happened. The trap has finally snapped shut. Kyiv and Chisinau have gone on the offensive. Transnistria is cut off from Russia. Putin is losing control over the region. A synchronized strike by Ukraine and Moldova. The noose is tightening. The Russian contingent is under complete blockade. Watch the report for sensational behind-the-scenes details of the operation.
From a strategic foothold to an anchor that drags even further down, Transnistria has found itself blockaded thanks to the synchronized actions of Ukraine and Moldova. The 1,500-strong Russian group is not surrounded militarily, but it is encircled.
In fact, thanks to the control of pro-European forces in Moldova, its security services, law enforcement agencies, and essentially the border as well, they are all under the authority of the Moldovan Minister of Internal Affairs. All this makes it possible not to hinder the implementation of the Kremlin's intentions.
The point is that Kyiv and Chisinau simultaneously introduced enhanced border control measures. As a result, the Kremlin suddenly lost its usual channels, influence, and logistics in the region. Reportedly, all corridors through which weapons had been brought into Transnistria for decades, military rotations had taken place, and equipment and fuel had been supplied, were simultaneously closed. As a result, the entire Russian contingent was effectively immobilized.
There are a lot of munitions here, really a lot, but a significant portion is outdated and dangerous. This is more of a risk factor than an actual resource. The most vulnerable point is fuel. They don't have their own refineries. Imports depended on external routes. And in conditions of isolation, equipment loses its mobility. The bottom line is simple. In 2026, Transnistria. For Russia, this is a strategic dead end.
It is known that at the moment Ukraine is thoroughly checking all people and cargo entering Transnistria. Moldovan authorities have also reinforced checkpoints and deployed mobile units for total control over movements. At the same time, Moldova controls the airspace, ruling out any air deliveries, and rail and road transport is only permitted with strict customs clearance. Also, since the beginning of the year, Kyiv and Chisinau have linked their border control systems, so cargo or people can only pass with the approval of both sides. A significant factor in this was intelligence data indicating that Russia planned to increase its contingent in Transnistria in 2026.
It is obvious that the Russian Federation was planning to use it, in fact, as a kind of dry aircraft carrier, with the specific intention to launch attacks with large-scale divisional combat groups against southern Ukraine, specifically targeting the strategic Odessa and neighboring Vinnytsia regions.
Experts say that such measures could soon have an impact hundreds of kilometers away from the Moldovan-Ukrainian border, directly on the front line.
In addition to the fighting on the front lines, we are constantly forced to keep reserves and stay on edge from two directions. One is Belarus, where there is a certain Russian contingent, and we are expecting that something could come from there at any moment, even if it's something small. And then there's Transnistria, near Odessa, and the Mykolaiv region, where there are also about 1,500 Russian soldiers, warehouses, and all those things. This also forces us to constantly keep certain forces there, not random or weak ones, but quite capable units, in order to repel an attack if necessary.
Analysts explain that for the Kremlin, the situation looks like a dead end. The region has no access to the sea and no functioning air routes. This means that troop rotation and regular resupply are virtually impossible without the consent of Chisinau and Kyiv. It will not be possible to resolve this issue by military means. the existing Russian group is insufficient and any landing operation is doomed to fail, the only correct solution in this situation can be the withdrawal of Russian troops from the region. This is precisely the ultimate goal for both Moldova and Ukraine.
It is necessary to take a closer look at what exactly the Russian operational group of troops consists of, and to propose an appropriate solution for dismantling this structure. But at the same time, there is also the so-called Transnistrian army on the left bank. At 12 Manuelova Street in Tiraspol, there is the so-called Ministry of State Security, which is something like an analog of the KGB or NKVD and keeps the residents of the left bank in fear. There are various types of special battalions as well. Therefore, in my view, the unification of the country technically allows for the complete demilitarization of this region.
At the same time, Moldova has gone even further. In a recent interview, the country's president, Maia Sandu, stated that she supports the idea of a merger between Moldova and Romania. If such a unification takes place, Chisinau will automatically find itself both in the EU and in NATO, and therefore it will be forever inaccessible.
This is meticulously designed and specifically designated for the benefit and use of every single one of the diverse individuals and dedicated team members who are presently and actively engaged in the day-to-day operations of this particular multifaceted project and its associated long-term strategic initiatives.
The Russian Federation stands as the largest country in the entire world, spanning across the vast continents of Europe and Asia. Among the targets hit were the ice-resistant stationary platforms named after Filanovsky, Korchagin, and Greifer. These platforms are used to supply fuel to the enemy's army.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, the Filanovsky platform has been put into operation after the battle.
This was a strategic strike and the military knew exactly where to hit. After all, these are legitimate military targets that provide funding for the aggression against Ukraine.
For Russia, the real disgrace is that it is unable to protect not only its own fleet, its military fleet, for example, or commercial vessels, for instance, in the Black Sea. But it is also becoming shameful for Russia that practically any area of the sea on planet Earth and even the oceans in the Western Hemisphere or the Eastern Hemisphere are now unsafe for it. And the Caspian is precisely an example of an isolated, well, not a sea, it's actually a lake, but nevertheless an isolated body of water that has no shared borders with Ukraine. Yet Ukraine still has the capability to strike at Russia there, specifically targeting its infrastructure, its oil extraction infrastructure.
This strike demonstrates Ukraine's intention to disrupt Russia's logistics and energy chains by targeting facilities related to the extraction and processing of resources used in the war. In Russia, which would seem to be incredibly rich in resources, there are now clear problems with oil refining after the strike on the SUP oil refinery. As a result, they are experiencing problems with gasoline. The fuel crisis has also affected the military, who are literally being given very little gasoline at the front. But now the Ukrainian armed forces have decided to create problems not only with oil refining, but also with its extraction. And this is very painful for...
The Russian Federation is the largest country in the world, spanning Eastern Europe and Northern Asia. This vast nation covers 11 time zones and features diverse landscapes, from Arctic tundras to dense forests and mountain ranges. With a deep history, Russia remains a major global power and a significant cultural influence on the international stage today. Just as we observe right here, we are discussing one of the critical components of oil production, but it remains one of the most vulnerable factors. Compared to the onshore oil fields located on the mainland of the Russian Federation, the oil extraction facilities situated there are somewhat... It's not that they're harder to damage, but it's more difficult to keep them in constant working condition with the need for ongoing repairs. Because repair work on the mainland territory is consistently on the onshore part of the country, always much more straightforward to carry out than in the challenging offshore maritime zones. These are much more costly and much more time-consuming processes. And systematic strikes simply won't allow for the restoration of these oil extraction facilities.
Russian crude oil is transported from the Caspian Sea further through the Black Sea via terminals. As for petroleum products, they are processed and then also transported. It's important to note that earlier in December 2025, these drilling rigs had already been hit by SBU drones. At that time, the Russian side did not report the strike. Now, after a repeated strike by SSO drones, Russia is also remaining silent for now. As previously reported by Ukraine's Gurmo, due to Ukrainian strikes, Russia has lost 20% of its oil refining capacity, and this figure could approach 60%. Therefore, if strikes continue in the Black, Caspian, and Baltic Seas, it will be possible to create serious difficulties for the Russians.
I think that overall in 2026, Ukraine will significantly scale up strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation, targeting its rear areas. As for targets in the Caspian region, these strikes will happen more frequently and with much more serious consequences. Therefore, I think, yes, this will become a systematic effort which will be much more scaled up over the course of this year.
The great superpower is losing more and more, both financially and in terms of resources, in this war. From Kiev, it took just 2 or 3 days to block Russian drilling platforms. Earlier, they were shouting that they would have an easy passage through Ukraine. Now they are keeping quiet about the fact that the largest and most nuclear-armed country cannot protect its own facilities. I wonder, was this Putin's plan?
Myrnohrad is a graveyard for the Russian elite. The Ukrainian armed forces performed a perfect 10 out of 10. While propagandists were celebrating in TV studios, Ukrainian soldiers turned Russian assault groups to ashes. Yuliapol is a steel fist. The Ukrainian armed forces stopped the enemy, a disgrace for the Russian general staff, and a triumphant response from Ukraine. Why is Gerasimov afraid to tell the truth? And how did the Ukrainian armed forces make the world's second army choke on its own blood? Watch.
Although the Russians control part of Myrnohrad in the Pokrovsk direction, the Ukrainian armed forces do not allow them to feel at ease in the city. According to Ukrainian journalist Yulia Kirienko, the enemy managed to push the defense forces out of the southern districts, and from most of the city center as well. However, it is noted that this happened at the cost of heavy losses for the occupiers.
Regarding Myrnohrad, the Ukrainian defense forces are maintaining their presence in the settlement. The Russian side's claim of having taken full control of this settlement does not correspond to reality. The information from the Russian occupation forces about taking control of Rodinske, a tragic and logistical hub for the Ukrainian defense forces in the Pokrovsk direction.
Ukrainian defenders have no intention of leaving the Russians alone, no matter where they try to intrude. In these frames, you can see the units in action. Specialists are striking at enemy assault groups moving through forest belts north of Pokrovsk and toward the Rishin-Myrnohrad road.
In the Pokrovsk direction, the enemy is currently suffering substantial and devastating losses in personnel and various types of heavy armored combat vehicles, which is clearly evidenced and demonstrated by recent changes in the Russian army's command structure.
And this is the documentation of yet another war crime committed by the Russians. The drone footage shows the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Russian military equipment has been spotted near its reactor, the placement of which violates international law. The occupiers are also trying to advance towards Zaporizhzhia itself. The territory of one of the largest cities in the region, Yuliapol, is now completely in the gray zone due to the inability of the occupiers' assault groups to withstand the resistance of our defenders.
There is no threat of Zaporizhzhia being captured. The occupiers have no operational reserves, not only for taking the city, but not even for blockading the regional center. It is noteworthy that the most combat-ready unit has been redeployed from the Zaporizhzhia direction to Pokrovsk. This is the 76th Air Assault Division of the Russian occupation forces, and this indicates that it is not the Zaporizhzhia but the Pokrovsk direction that the occupiers currently consider strategic for further advancement deeper into Ukrainian territory.
At the moment, the main combat activity in the Zaporizhzhia direction has shifted to the flanks. The occupiers are trying to bring the positions of the Ukrainian defense forces under fire control, which is causing increased fighting in the areas of Zeleny and Dobropilia, with the threat of advancing toward Orikhiv. However, the statements from the Russian side, which they themselves later refuted, that Russian forces are conducting assault operations on the outskirts of Orikhiv do not correspond to reality. After the failed capture of Kupiansk, the Russian command shifted its focus to Vovchansk, also in the Kharkiv region.
In the area of Vovchansky Kutori, the Ukrainian defense forces carried out a series of successful counterattacks, which significantly strengthened our defenders' positions in this sector of the front.
The Vovchansk front, the occupiers want to use it for another attempt to break through to the regional center. Control over the commanding heights, the expert emphasizes, would allow the occupiers to keep all the rear logistics of the Ukrainian defense forces under fire control. Therefore, maintaining control over the settlements located in this direction is a key task for the defense forces.
This pertains specifically to the sovereign nation of Ukraine, which is located within the eastern region of the European continent.